The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps didn't bother with the polite formalities of international law. There was no televised declaration of a blockade, no filing of paperwork at the United Nations, and no diplomatic grace period. Instead, they took to the radio. On the morning of March 2nd, every captain in the Persian Gulf heard the same message crackling over VHF Channel 16. No ship is permitted to pass. The IRGC followed that up with a very simple, very direct promise to set fire to any vessel that dared to test their resolve. In the world of modern maritime commerce, you don't need a 1,000-ship navy to shut down the world. You just need enough credible threats to make an insurance adjuster lose their mind. We are talking about the most strategic jugular vein on the planet. This narrow passage accounts for roughly 20% of the world's total consumption of crude oil and liquefied natural gas. It is the exit ramp for the energy that keeps the lights on in Tokyo, the factories running in Shanghai, and the heaters humming in Berlin. When the IRGC hit the stop button, the impact was visceral. Traffic through the strait didn't just dip, it cratered by 70% almost instantly. By the end of the first week of the conflict, the flow was effectively zero. The freedom of navigation we Americans like to talk about turned out to be a very expensive illusion. As soon as the first reports of attacks on commercial tankers hit the wires, the maritime industry went into a state of total paralysis. This wasn't a legal blockade. It was a de facto closure enforced by the sheer reality of risk. The global market realized, far too late, that its entire energy security strategy was built on the hope that this 21-mile-wide noose would never be tightened. That hope died on March 2nd. In this video, we are going to analyze how this narrow choke point has become the epicenter of a global economic collapse, why the sudden evaporation of Middle Eastern energy is about to send shockwaves through every American household, and how the total meltdown of the maritime insurance market has turned the world's most vital shipping lanes into a graveyard of idle tankers. As of March 2nd, 2026, the Persian Gulf has officially become the world's most expensive parking lot. There are currently over 700 non-Iranian tankers bobbing like giant flammable corks on both sides of the Strait of Hormuz. We are talking about 334 crude oil tankers and hundreds of others carrying everything from gasoline to jet fuel, all waiting for a security guarantee that isn't coming. It is a monumental traffic jam that effectively signals the death of global maritime certainty. In the high-stakes world of global trade, courage is a commodity that is priced by insurance adjusters in London and New York. Right now, that price is astronomical. Before the strikes, war risk insurance for a trip through the strait was a manageable 0.125% of the hull value. Within 48 hours of the IRGC radio broadcasts, that rate tripled and quadrupled, landing somewhere between 0.2 and 0.4%. For a very large crude carrier, or a VLCC, that jump represents an additional $250,000 in overhead for a single transit. And that is if you can even find an underwriter willing to take the call. Most insurance giants have simply walked away from the table, leaving the world's energy fleet in a state of total paralysis. The reaction from the shipping titans was swift and unsentimental. Giants like Maersk and Hapag-Lloyd didn't wait for a diplomatic solution. They simply hit the delete key on their Persian Gulf routes. Their solution? The Cape of Good Hope. It sounds like something out of a 19th century adventure novel. But in 2026, it is a logistical nightmare. Diverting a tanker around the southern tip of Africa adds at least 14 days to the journey. In a world built on just-in-time supply chains, 2 weeks is an eternity. This massive detour isn't just about lost time. It is about the sudden, violent inflation of logistics costs. Extra fuel, extra labor, and the sheer scarcity of available hulls are driving freight rates into the stratosphere. We have spent the last 30 years optimizing the global economy for maximum efficiency, stripping out every ounce of redundancy to save a few pennies on the dollar. Now, we are finding out exactly what happens when that efficiency hits a brick wall. The global shipping industry is learning a hard lesson. A supply chain is only as strong as its most vulnerable choke point. And right now, the most vital choke point on Earth is being patrolled by men who have absolutely no interest in keeping your gas prices low. If the closure of the Strait of Hormuz is a heart attack for the global economy, then East Asia is the patient currently flatlining on the operating table. For decades, we have marveled at the Asian economic miracle, but we rarely mention that this miracle is fueled almost entirely by a steady, uninterrupted straw dipped into the Persian Gulf. That straw has just been snapped in half. The Big Four, China, India, Japan, and South Korea, are not just major players in this crisis. They are the primary victims of this maritime standoff. These four nations alone account for a staggering 75% of the crude oil and 59% of the liquefied natural gas that normally transits through the strait. The math is as simple as it is devastating. Without access to the massive exports from Saudi Arabia, Iraq, and the United Arab Emirates, the industrial engines of the East are grinding to a halt. We are already seeing reports that major refineries across Asia are preparing to slash their operating capacities by 20 to 30%. They aren't doing this because of a lack of demand. They are doing it because the physical barrels of oil simply aren't arriving. You cannot run a world-class industrial hub on thoughts and prayers or strategic reserves that were only designed to last a few months. The irony here is thick enough to choke on. China, the self-proclaimed rising superpower and the world's factory, is perhaps the most vulnerable. Its massive manufacturing sector is essentially a giant machine that turns Middle Eastern oil into cheap consumer goods for the rest of the world. When that oil stops flowing, the assembly lines stop moving. This isn't just about higher gas prices for a commuter in Beijing or New Delhi. It is about a total systemic failure of the global supply chain. If the refineries in Ulsan or Yokohama cannot get their crude, the ripple effects will hit every electronics store and car dealership in the United States within weeks. We have spent 30 years building a just-in-time world, where warehouses are small and efficiency is king. But just-in-time only works when the ships are moving. Right now, the ships are sitting idle, and the energy that powers the global factory is trapped behind a wall of Iranian speedboats and naval mines. The Asian industrial heart is skipping beats, and there is no backup plan. We are about to find out exactly how much of our modern lifestyle depends on the stability of a region we have spent the last half-century destabilizing. Let us talk about the great American fairy tale: energy independence. For the better part of a decade, politicians from both sides of the aisle have been telling us that thanks to the shale revolution, we are finally the masters of our own destiny. They promised that American fracking had insulated us from the chaos of the Middle East. It was a beautiful lie. Sold in 30-second campaign ads, and in March 2026, that lie was exposed at every gas station from Los Angeles to Lubbock. The reality of the global oil market is that it functions like a single, massive bathtub. It does not matter if you are pouring water in from a tap in West Texas or a well in Riyadh. If someone pulls the plug in the Strait of Hormuz, the water level drops for everyone. We might pump plenty of crude here at home, but we do not own the price of it. Our refineries are part of a global machine, and when 20% of the world's supply vanishes overnight, the freedom molecules we produce in the Permian Basin suddenly become a lot more expensive for the American family to buy. The sticker shock has been violent. In California, we are already seeing prices at the pump screaming past $7 a gallon, while even in oil-rich Texas, the $5 mark is a vanishing memory. This is not just a headache for commuters. It is a systemic economic toxin. When energy costs spike like this, they act as a regressive tax on every single person who buys a loaf of bread or orders a package online. At the Federal Reserve, the mood is one of quiet desperation. For the last few years, the central bank has been trying to manage a soft landing for the economy. But you cannot navigate a landing when your engines are on fire. The Fed has plenty of tools to manage demand, but Jerome Powell cannot print more oil. You cannot interest rate hike your way out of a maritime blockade. We are staring at the return of the ghost of the 1970s, a toxic cocktail of stagnant growth and skyrocketing inflation that hasn't been seen in 40 years. Washington can point fingers and blame greedy corporations or foreign adversaries all they want. But the cold truth is that we built a lifestyle on cheap, flowing energy, and we never bothered to check if the pipes were secure. The ultimate geopolitical irony of 2026 is that we spent trillions of dollars building a digital, borderless world, only to have it dismantled by a few guys in speedboats with Soviet-era minds. We convinced ourselves that we lived in an era of the end of history, where trade would always trump tanks, and the flow of energy was as guaranteed as the sunrise. We were wrong. Geography does not care about your smartphone apps or your stock market algorithms. It only cares about who controls the gates. The global economic order as we knew it is effectively dead. Even if the United States Navy manages to blast the strait open tomorrow, The trust that underpinned the global market has evaporated. The just-in-time model is being replaced by just-in-case stockpiling, which is a polite way of saying everything is about to get a lot more expensive, permanently. We are entering an era of regionalism and guarded borders, where the price of a gallon of gas or a plastic toy is dictated not by the market, but by the latest radio transmission from a coastal battery. The final verdict is a bitter pill for the West to swallow. We outsourced our manufacturing to Asia and our energy security to the Middle East, assuming that the two would always stay connected by a thin blue line of water. Now that line has been cut. We are not just facing a temporary supply shock. We are witnessing the structural collapse of a world built on the delusion of cheap everything. The era of low-cost convenience is over, and it didn't end with a whimper or a diplomatic treaty. It ended with a crackle on a radio and a 21-mile stretch of water that finally proved it was more powerful than the entire global financial system. Welcome to the new reality. It is going to be a very long, very expensive walk home.